Okay. Good morning. Is that on? Nope. Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello. Hi. Good to see all of you. I'm Felicia Marcus, chair of the board, and today is Thursday. I miss you saying Tuesday. It says Thursday, but Tuesday. Now I'm scared. September 20th at 9:34 a.m. and the meeting is called to order. With me are, to my left, board member Stephen Moore. To my right, see, I can't even speak.
Your mind?
To my right, board member Tam Dudek, and to her right, board member Joaquin Esquivel. Ms. Sobek, you'll probably do a better job introducing the staff that are assisting today than I've done so far.
Gosh, I certainly hope so. Good morning, Chair Marcus. To my left is Chief Counsel Michael Laufer, and to my right is Chief Deputy Jonathan Bishop, and assisting us is Janine Townsend, clerk to the board, and Courtney Tyler, her assistant.
Great. Thanks very much. For anyone who is new to our forum here, take a look at the nearest exit to you. If you hear an emergency sound, assume that it is, or it's a drill, but take it seriously and pack up your stuff and your friends and take the stairs downstairs. We assemble in Cesar Chavez Park, and you can wait with us if you want, near 10th and J. And if you need assistance and can't get down the stairs, someone will magically appear in an orange vest, or one of us will guide you to a protected area, and there's one on every floor. The meeting's being webcast and recorded, so it's important to get close enough to the microphone so that it's heard. We can hear you, but we want everybody else to be able to hear you. And then finally, please take any noise-making devices you have and make them quiet, however you wish to make them quiet. There you go. Next, we move on to a presentation of a Sustained Superior Accomplishment Award, Eric Ekdahl. And Julie Rosarda.
Julie and I are going to jointly present this award today. It's my great pleasure to present a
yeah, it's contagious.
Accomplishment Award, thank you, to Janelle Heinzler in the enforcement section in the Division of Water Rights. I want to talk a little bit about the great work that Janelle has done and talk a little bit about just what the entire enforcement section did during the drought. The drought already seems like kind of a distant memory in some respects, but if we think back to 2014 and 2015, water supply was at really historic lows. And there were constraints unlike really we hadn't seen in a generation in the state. And the enforcement section and the entire enforcement section was suddenly charged with going out and making sure that these curtailments that had been issued were followed, that people were following the rule of water rights priority, that they weren't stealing water or taking water outside of their priority, and following kind of the rules that the board had set out. And during the 2014 and 2015 years, or summers specifically, the enforcement section did over 2,000 individual inspections, and that's just an incredible increase. Typically, we do about 150 per year. So, roughly multiplying it by, 5 times? I can't do math this early in the morning, but Janelle specifically, I can do this little bit of math, did over 300 of those inspections on her own. So just this one staff person is responsible for 15% roughly of the entire inspections done by the entire enforcement section. That's a tremendous workload, and not only were these done quickly, but they were done well. The reports were completed on time. The rapport that she had with the public, some of these were very contentious and extremely, I don't want to use the word fraught, but fraught inspections where you're going out and telling people that they can't use water because their livelihoods are at stake. The farming and agriculture that's dependent on this water suddenly wasn't there because of the magnitude of the drought. And yet the relationships that she was able to build with the public and with those that she was inspecting went over very well, and she was able to effectively communicate kind of what the needs were, what the person needed to do, and resulted in very effective outcomes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julie, and Julie will talk a little bit more about what Janelle does currently in the division and why we feel that this is a very merited award.
Thank you, Eric. So after all this exemplary work on the drought, Janelle's continued to carry a very high workload, and these are all complicated cases. Anybody in the enforcement section can tell you that none of the projects are simple. They're all their own types of projects. They all have complications, but she has the most particularly complicated ones. She has this ability to come in with her technical skill and analyze water rights issues in a way that she can see multiple courses of action. She can always kind of see the creative things. What makes her really valuable beyond her technical skill, though, is her ability to work with folks. She listens, she truly listens to the diverter's point of view. She truly thinks about how our proposed courses of action are going to have an impact. And she comes up with these solutions that are collaborative, they're technically sound, they improve the environment, and they also preserve and protect the water rights system of California. Working in enforcement is a really challenging job, and Janelle makes it look very easy. She's a tremendous asset to our division, and we need a lot more people like Janelle in our water board family. So it's with great honor that Eric and I present the Sustained Superior Accomplishment Award to Janelle Heinzler.
The Iron Woman of the, it's pretty darn impressive.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Moving this way. Okay.
We are, okay. This way, I don't know why we always just go over there. Maybe it's because of the, well, we'll see. Okay.
She's mumbling going on.
Huh?
She's mumbling going on.
Great work.
She. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah, I know there's.
Congratulations.
There you go. The uniform. All right. Next, I'll entertain a motion regarding the minutes from the September 4th board meeting.
There's no public forum?
Oh, I forgot public forum. Do we have anyone here for public forum? Oh, there's no public forum. Sorry.
You just knew ahead of time.
I know. I'm sorry. I haven't had as much coffee as I usually do in the morning. It obviously really matters. Sorry.
It's the Thursday that's throwing everything off.
You think so? Yeah, maybe that's it.
I need to abstain on the minutes of
Oh,
September
yeah, that's
4th.
right. You weren't here.
I'll move adoption of the minutes.
And we can just vote at that point, because I don't need a second, because I'll second.
Don't confuse me.
I'm sorry.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. There we go. Items 2 and 3 are uncontested. Item 3 has a change sheet to it. Do we have any speakers? Do I have a motion on item 2 and on item 3 with its change sheet?
I'll move adoption of item 2 and item 3 with the change sheet and acknowledge once again a lot of work there from the Santa Ana region on selenium, very complicated issue down there, and then also just the very important non-point source funding program that we authorize annually. This year with the timber fund thrown in, is that AB 1492, I believe, that made that possible. And some very substantive additions related to wildfire recovery, and that was part of the change sheet. And so thanks to staff for that thoughtful work. And with that, I move adoption.
Thank you for that.
Second, and echo the board members' thanks to staff. I know there was a lot of creative work going on around funding and our ability to fund some really critical activities. So, second.
Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, carries. Thanks for all the hard work. Sorry to not let you display all your acumen. Nice to see you, though. All right, item number 4. Oh, thank you.
Good morning, Chair Marcus, fellow board members. My name is David Ceccarelli. I'm one of the fee managers in the Division of Administrative Services. To me, today, assisting me on this item is Deputy Director from the Division of Administrative Services, John Russell, David Rose from the Office of the Chief Counsel, and Amanda Montgomery from the Division of Water Rights. Good morning. So before you today, for your consideration is a resolution adopting emergency regulations, revising the core regulatory water rights fee schedules. I do want to mention at this time, we also have 2 change sheets that we'll be discussing throughout the presentation. And one basically, and they're slight changes, basically, one basically provides more clarification on the process to receive the proposed discount for small domestic registrations. And the second clarifies, we have a fee schedule summary sheet, so that clarifies the fee schedule summary sheet to best match our fee regulations. So the item and staff report discuss in detail the proposed changes to the core regulatory fees. This morning, I wanted to briefly discuss a few notable changes to the fee schedules and provide you an update of staff's outreach. Annually, we set fee schedules to meet our authorized budgetary expenditures. When setting fees, I take in consideration several key factors such as total reserve amount, revenues from fees, our authorized budgetary expenditures. In addition, are fees equitable, sustainable? Is each fee payer paying their share towards supporting program costs? And this is something that we've really been looking at in the last few years, just because of the fact that the program is now maturing, and our fee schedules have been in place for roughly 15 years now, and we've noticed kind of the effort of staff, the level of effort on some of our permits and our applications and our license and the workload. And so, as I did last year, and as I will be talking today, we're trying to again align that workload with our fees. So just kind of a little overview of our stakeholder activity. Annual stakeholder meetings were held after each iteration of the governor's budget. We had one on February 8th, we had one on June 14th, and we had one on August 2nd. Each of these meetings are webcast. The meetings are set up to provide information, listen to stakeholders' concerns, and receive feedback. We present information on our fund conditions, our budget, our cost drivers. We provide workload updates. We present staff proposals on fee adjustments, along with providing multiple options on these staff proposals. I would also say that shortly after our June 14th meeting, we sent out a document on our LIRIS list, and there's roughly a couple thousand subscribers on our LIRIS list, that basically highlighted staff's proposals and staff workload and just the different items and issues that were taking place in the fiscal year. And that was also to be sent out just so we could receive feedback and get some information. Again, I will state that through our stakeholder process, we get the information out. Again, we're trying to receive feedback, a lot of times we don't receive a number of feedback that we'd like to get.
Roughly, how many stakeholders participated in both, say, through the webinar, but then also in
Right.
person, just to have people have a sense of that?
I would say, usually maybe up to a half dozen in the room, but then our webinars, anywhere from maybe 30 to 50 webcast individuals are logging in. And then throughout the year, when individual stakeholders want to come in, we definitely bring in additional stakeholders, discuss their issues, their issues that relate to their programs. One other effort also, and we'll touch basis on this, along with having these meetings, staff had formed a work group to talk with the livestock, the Cattlemen Association on the registration fees for livestock and our small domestic use. So we had multiple work groups and discussions, and I'll go forward as on our proposal here that came about because of that meeting. So this is just basically showing kind of a point in time of our fund condition for fiscal year 18-19, where we're at. And so the middle column there is basically illustrating if we don't do anything this year, if we do no adjustments to our fees, our reserve will go into the negative, about 2.4%. And so in front of you, with these proposals, if these are adopted, we're projected that our revenue, that we'll end the year about a 10% reserve. Now, again, keep in mind, there's still a structural deficit taking place here of about $2.5 million. And that's what we've been doing, for the last few years. We've been using the reserve to offset cost. Our reserve last year, we ended it with about 16.8%. So you could see that what's happening here is we're actually using some of the reserve this year, also minimizing some of the fee increases, but also now drawing the reserve down from nearly 17% to 10%. And I know I'll mention this on the water quality side, and I'll mention it here on the water rights side. It's important to note that each year that we're offsetting these costs with the reserve, it's not that the costs are going away. They defer to the next year, and that basically becomes my starting point when setting my budget and determining what those fee increases are going to be needed. And I guess it'd be a good time to point out this also. I'll mention this kind of at the end here. Kind of looking at it right now, I would say, even going into next year, I'd probably be looking at about a 3 to 6% increase on the Water Rights Fund. So moving into some of our proposed fee increases here. And we'll start with the permit license annual fee. Currently, they pay a $150 base fee, and there's a per acre foot charge for per each acre foot greater than 10 acre feet. And so they currently pay 0.069. And so our proposal is to raise the base fee from 150 to 225 and increase the per acre foot charge from 0.069 to 0.073. Some of the rationale behind that is, we currently have nearly 2,700 fee payers of 2,675 of 7,300 fee payers. That's 37% they're paying solely the base fee. And since 0304, that base fee has increased only a single time, so from 100 to 150, and that was in fiscal year 11-12. So again, that hasn't been raised in over 6 years, and at that time it was a 50% increase. Over the same period, the per acre foot charge has increased from 0.030 to 0.069. That's a 130% increase. So those that are greater than 10 acre feet have basically taken the burden of the fee increases and been supporting this cost. So increasing the base fee 50% will result in the base fee having increased less than the per acre foot fee since 0304. So what we're projecting is going from 100 to 225, which is a 125% increase since 0305. Compared to, again, I'm just pointing this out from the per acre foot charge, which went from 0.03, and if this is adopted to 0.073, 143%. So it's still lower than the per acre foot charge. And just one other note here, since the last base fee increase in 11-12, the per acre foot fee has increased 5 times for a total of 38%. So it's gone up from 0.05 to 0.069. And our costs have continued to go up. The water rights budget expenditures have gone from 16.8 million to, I believe it's like 24.6 million, which again is about a 48% increase. Again, you know, staff got together, we looked at it and we feel that everyone should basically help pay towards some of this cost. So that's basically our rationale from raising the base fee.
Is there thought to raising the base fee yearly now then, instead of shocking it every 6 years, and start to get it more on a time step that allows for a sort of a smaller adjustment over time, as opposed to, again, you know,
I agree with that. I definitely agree with it. I think it's time when we start saying, you know, we're going to do a 5% across the board, that kind of every sector in the fee schedule takes a 5% increase.
Might feel is less complex.
And definitely, I would agree. I would
And
agree.
I'm sure people would argue it's not as fair as the more complex thing you've done. Who knows? But it would certainly be simpler.
Well, you know, for me, it is that going from 150 to 225, and you know, I don't know the financial situation of all the, you know, the right holders, so I can't say that, you know, it's insurmountable, but it is kind of a shock to what is otherwise, you know, it's a steep increase, and I understand why, and I understand that it hasn't kept up. So, but yeah.
Yeah, philosophically, that's one of the things that we're looking at for the upcoming years. Is in the past 5 years, when the economy was a little bit bad, we've always adjusted our fees basically to the betterment of the fee payers. We took the hit where we had to in our reserve. But if we did this, we know salaries are going to go up. The administration and the bargaining units bargain about a 3 to 5% increase for all the bargaining units. So we know that's a given. So we're looking at maybe shifting our model a little bit to include a incremental increase like that every year. It'll provide a little bit more consistency to our program, a little bit more predictability to the fee payers. And we've had this discussion with the fee payers in the past, and you know, it's human nature. I'd rather have the money in my pocket this year and take the risk that we can hold the wolves from the door next year. But it really is getting to the point where, you know, like David said, we need to manage the reserve a little bit, and maybe a more predictable yearly increase is better than this, you know, holding off, no increases for a couple years and then a shock to the system.
Another adjustment is the pending application annual fee. Currently, they also pay a $150 base fee, and they pay a per acre foot charged 0.069 per each acre foot greater than 10 acre feet, similar to the current fee schedule for the licenses and the permits. Our proposal is to increase the per pending application annual fee from $150 to $750, and as the permits and license on the per acre foot charge, raise that to 0.069 to 0.73. Last year, I know we went through this at the board meeting, and we increased the pending application from 150 to 750, and we brought this to the board for adoption. However, due to an administrative error, the text was not ultimately included in the draft regulations, so therefore we're recommending it again this year. The pending application annual fee is charged to most, but not all pending applications. It is applicable to projects that have been diverting water or built their projects before receiving a permit, where the applicant is lead on the CEQA, but has delayed completing the CEQA process, where the applicant fails to provide supplemental information or other factors. This increase will help move towards a fairer cost structure, as many small diverter applications can be complex and can take considerably staff time to process over the years. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add on that, or?
No,
No, that covers it. We do find that the small diverters, we'd like to think they'd be easy, but a number of them are in areas like our North Coast, where we have our North Coast in-stream flow policy. Those are traditionally, that policy makes things easier to make through the process, but it's still a complex process. So even if someone's going for less than 10 acre feet, it's still quite a bit of staff effort to get those through. So we're trying to have a more equitable distribution. But it is targeting certain projects, the parties that were diverting before, unauthorized, before they came into the permitting process and continue to divert. And then, like David mentioned, projects that are slow to complete their CEQA or slow to complete the milestones in processing.
So temporary permit for underground storage from high flow events. So when the board significantly lowered fees for these types of temporary permits targeting underground storage of high flows in 2015, staff were also directed to consider this further, consult with stakeholders, and come back with a revised fee schedule. Currently, staff is proposing to increase the fee from $100 plus the dollar per every 100 acre feet of water diverted in excess of 10,000 acre feet to an initial fee of $5,000 plus 10 cents per acre foot of diversion requested, and a renewal fee of $1,500 plus 20 cents per acre of actual flow diverted. So just a little bit of some background here. So staff conducted 5 meetings and 1 workshop over the past year, so between 2016 and 2018, and solicited comments several times relating to these fees. Comments have varied, with a number of stakeholders preferring no change or a low fee, while other stakeholders had concerns about applicants paying appropriate fees so other fee payers don't bear the cost. The proposal in front of you was received from Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District in June. Of our applicants, Yolo County has received the most of these temporary permits for the last 3 winters. Their fee proposal was posted to our website after receipt, shared by an email with stakeholders to solicit comments in July. At that time, none were received, and as a discussion item at the August stakeholder meeting. The proposal has two notable features. First, it sets a higher initial processing base fee of $5,000 plus an acre foot charge based on the amount requested, which staff sees appropriate as staff costs are incurred to process as applications for the potential to divert the full amount requested. It also sets a lower base fee for renewals, which appear appropriate to staff in cases where the project is a duplicate of the original proposal. There is still a significant workload involved in renewals, and new issues may come to light after implementation of the initial project. The Yolo County approach for the renewals also includes the per acre feet charge only on water diverted, which is an appropriate requested by several stakeholders as soon as these temporary permits are targeting peak flows that may occur infrequently. The proposed fee, while higher than the current fee, is considerably lower than estimated staff cost to prepare one of these permits. And over the last couple of years on receiving some of these, our estimated cost was about $40,000 based on tracking processing of 2 applications in 2016. So staff also recommends continuing closely monitoring these fees and adjust as needed in the coming years. Anything like that?
Yeah. So we've really tried to reach out with the stakeholders on this issue. It's something that, it's a type of practice that we'd like to encourage with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act ramping up in the coming years. So we're just looking for that right balance of encouraging projects, but also having sufficient coverage of staff costs, and also having parties feel like they're bringing projects to us that can move forward. We did have a number of projects that have backed out after we started processing, and it's unclear if that's because our fee is so low that people just kind of, the bar is very low to come to us. But we're trying to find that right balance, and I think it's something we're going to watch very closely each year. Right now, we've only had about a dozen of these come to us, and maybe 6 have issued. That's very low. We know we've got about 260 GSAs that will participate in SGMA, and when I go to the conferences, they all want to seek new surface water supplies. So I think we're going to get a large number of applicants. We're not on that front edge of the wave yet. to see.
I think too, part of it is trying to figure out where the or maybe this is B, biggest bang for the buck is, and some of the larger ones are going to be probably where those are anyway. But the other issue is I think people tend to underestimate how much work goes into ensuring that other water rights holders aren't harmed by something, because one person's flow they see going by is another person's recharge currently. So it's not the simplest thing in the world. I think we're going to see a lot of competition for high flow event water rights, for winter water rights all across the state. So we do need to tool up for it and figure out what's the optimum scale. And I think the GSA scale is obviously one example. There are others certainly as well. But there may be folks who at first wanted to just pick off flows they saw going by and then realized that they were going to have a lot of protests from the people below them.
In general, I think people that have depleted basins in their groundwater might not have had as easy of time getting surface water, so it is kind of a harder pathway to surface water. But to the degree that there's peak flows out there, I think the board and staff are just trying to find ways to smooth that pathway for those projects.
Right.
Modifying our registration for small domestic use on our livestock pond fees. Back basically a year ago, September 19th of 2017, staff brought to you a proposal for adjusting our registration fees. These fees have not been adjusted since 03-04. And there was various stakeholders, including the California Cattlemen's Association, expressed opposition. And to kind of find a suitable compromise, the board directed staff to form a work group and to discuss these fee issues. So since the last board meeting, there were 4 stakeholder work group meetings that have been held, and several options were discussed. So we've come up with a staff's proposal. Kind of keep in mind that this proposal option was not opposed by the California Cattlemen's Association. And from the comment letter and what we've received from them is that they're not in a position to support the proposal, but it's far better proposal than what was brought to you last year. And kind of keep in mind that even under this proposed option, fees are only projected to cover about 45% of the staff expenditures when fully phased in. So with that said, our current fee is basically it's a $250 registration fee currently, and it's a $100 renewal fee every 5 years. And so we're looking at going to an annual fee basically. And so what we're proposing is maintaining a $250 registration fee, and then have a kind of a phase-in approach where you'd have a $50 fee for fiscal year 2018-19, $75 for 19-20, and then $100 for 2021, and then thereafter. We've also built in a maximum fee for the livestock ponds. And so what we're proposing is that the maximum fee for a single primary owner that's holding 5 or greater registrations would be capped. So meaning if you had 5, you would pay $250 in 18-19, and anything above, so 6, 7, you'd be capped at $250. In 19-20, $375, and then 20-21, $500.
This is to deal with that weird argument about how we would encourage people to consolidate their ponds. I remember that.
Yeah, essentially, you heard this last year about it being an outsized burden on those with a large number, and then there would be disincentives, essentially. So we can talk, if you'd like, about how we came up with the number 5.
That's fine.
But we did do a lot of thinking about it, and there's support for why 5 is a good number as a cap. And of course, everybody who has 6 or more would be paying capped out at that 5 total. There are, I believe, 8 entities that hold more than 5 ponds.
Along with this, the small domestic registrations, they would be put on the same fee schedule as the as the 50, 75, 100. There wouldn't be a cap form, of course, but there's what we would be providing is a discount for qualified low-income residents, which would amount to 20% of the proposed $100 fee phase-in in the following manner. So again, as I mentioned, 50, 75, 100, the 20% discount would reflect 40 the first year, 60, and then 80. And as I kind of mentioned during the start of the presentation, there's a change sheet that basically clarifies how this discount would phase in and how it would be implemented.
Yeah, I can mention that briefly. The change sheet simply expresses the mechanism for how that would take effect in the first year because of when the billing takes effect and when the fees take effect and when we get the information. So in the first year, somebody who qualifies for the fee reduction would have that applied as a credit for the second year, simply because of when the paperwork comes in and goes out.
And the qualification criteria, are they consistent with other our Division of Financial Assistance criteria for low income?
They are. We looked at the major programs that are held by basically every utility across the state. So SMUD, PG&E, City of San Francisco type parties, parties in LA, and they all have the same criteria. So it's a uniform standard at this point.
Thank you. That's great.
Finally, here are the small irrigation use registration fees, which are the AB 2121 areas of non-cannabis commercial crops. We're proposing to increase this fee currently from the $250 registration fee and the $100 renewal fee every 5 years to a $750 registration fee and then $100 annual fee. These, and if Amanda wants to touch a little more basis, but it's basically just working with program staff, looking at the cost of staff time to manage these. They can be complex. They can take different technical staff involved. Again, take considerable staff time to process. So these were, over the years, minimal in revenue receiving, and other programs are basically offsetting this cost. And so we're just trying to get us up to a level which will help pay for the cost of the small irrigation use registration. And finally here, this is something that we've done historically every time when we adopt our fees is increasing our water rights application petition filing fee caps by the Consumer Price Index. And I believe it was in the report about 2.9% this year. So it's increasing the water right application caps from $518,899 to $534,155, and the change petition caps from $6518 to $6710, and the change petitions involving transfer of water pursuant to Water Code Section 382, 1435, 1701, 1725, or 1735 cap from $518,899 to $534,155. And my understanding, though, is on the larger cap side, we have no one that hits that amount currently. So that ends staff's presentation. And go ahead, David.
I just wanted to go briefly over change sheet number 2, since it was already mentioned that we have it. Change sheet number 2 is the fee schedule. It's a summary of the fee schedule that's like an embedded link in paragraph 3 of the resolution. So I just wanted to touch upon it because it's part of the resolution. The only change to that is was already existing in the proposed reg text in section 1062, and that's that we put a ceiling essentially on the temporary permits for diversion to underground storage, because there would have been, without this ceiling, the possibility that some smaller projects would be paying more under this temporary permit fee than they would under the regular temporary permit fee. So what we added in was essentially a trigger that they would pay the lesser of either the regular temporary permit fee or this temporary permit fee. And so that was already in the reg text that went out with the agenda and the resolution. But to close the loop, we made that more clear in the fee schedule summary, because we know that a number of folks do rely on the fee schedule summary as opposed to the reg text. So change sheet 2 It is not a substantive change to the reg text. It mirrors the change to the reg text. So that's both of the change sheets for you.
Are there any questions or comments before we go to the speakers? Okay. Great. I'm going to go for 3 minutes. I have Bob Gore for the Kings River and Fresno and Trinitas Farming, followed by Daniel O'Hanlon for Westlands Water District, followed by Danny Merkley from the California Farm Bureau Federation, followed by Kirk Wilbur from the California Cattlemen's Association. Good to see you all.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, and staff. Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the folks enumerated. Staff is doing a great job working with stakeholders and developing these proposals, including program staff in the regions. It's a compliment to them. I'd like to apologize for this 11th hour communication about the groundwater diversion charge to storage or to underground storage, but it's evolving and it's a core program. And on August 30th, I had a bit of an epiphany on behalf of the clients. I attended the DWR-CDFA Floodmar program launch. There were about 200 people who participated, and most of them had no idea that you need to plan 1 to 2 years in advance. The permit process takes that long, that there's diversion conditions of high flow, that there are diversion windows. There were comments like, we have these gravel pits all over the state. Do you think we could fill them with water? So it's an essential core program for Sigma and other reasons that deserves due consideration, and I was glad to hear staff make this clear that they're going to adjust the rates as we go. There's another guidance that may help. The irrigation districts can't just divert water. As one engineer pointed out to me, Bob, we have to build a whole new irrigation district on top of the existing one. The intakes have to be capable of high flow, and they're not normally. We have to find groundwater basins. We have to put the discharge grounds in a checkerboard manner. We have to build whole new conveyance structures. So the consideration leading up to these permits is highly costly, and to add another cost burden may be a deterrent. Don't know for sure. We'll find out. That's the whole point of proceeding together collaboratively and being very concerned about how this impacts a Sigma. I will say 2 things. One, you can't use one program as a yardstick. It's not typical. And secondly, the per acre foot charge on the renewal permit makes no physical sense. Yeah, thank you very much.
Good morning, Daniel O'Hanlon.
Hi, Mr. Hanlon. Sorry, I was just getting notes down. Apologies.
No problem. Good morning, Daniel O'Hanlon, appearing on behalf of the Westlands Water District. My comments this morning begin with a reference to the attachment 2, which refers to the impact of the proposed fees. And it identifies the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation as the highest fee payer. And of course, as the chair and board members know, Bureau of Reclamation has declined to pay those fees based on sovereign immunity. And the bills ultimately go to the water contractors, Bureau's water contractors. Westlands, of course, is one of those water contractors. Last year, Westlands paid over $1 million in fees. That outcome is disproportionate to the share of the water it actually uses. And it's also disproportionate to its contribution to the workload of the water rights staff. That outcome is a product, of course, of the method used to calculate who pays what fees. And there are legal challenges pending to that methodology. I certainly won't belabor those points here. There were written comments submitted by the SOMAC firm, and we join in those. And the fees are currently the subject of a petition for writ of certiorari to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll see if the U.S. Supreme Court accepts review. But even if the fees are ultimately upheld as lawful, in Westland's view, they are still not fair. And Wessons will continue to look for ways, including working with your staff, to hopefully come up with a methodology that more fairly allocates the fees among the water users. And thank you for your attention this morning.
Thank you. And we're always open to those ideas, so that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Merkley, followed by Mr. Wilbur, followed by Joy Lewis from the California Strawberry Commission.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board. Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau Federation. Let me begin by saying I appreciate the openness from staff. They're holding multiple stakeholder meetings throughout the year to help the fee payers understand budget cost drivers and the state of the fund, both the WDPF and the Water Rights Fund. Also, as previously mentioned, I really appreciate the meetings that we had. Bill Thomas, Cattlemen's Association, and Farm Bureau to work on the stock pond fees, and still don't like them, but I think it was a good compromise. I will say that I didn't realize I was as intimidating as I am. I did come into one meeting. David asked me to come in to go over some things, and I walked into the conference room, and there were 8 staff there, several of which I think were attorneys. So apparently they thought I was going to react violently or something. I'm not sure what.
They just wanted to see you.
Yeah. So that being said, as farmers and as business people, we understand there's cost increases. Some of those you have control over and some of them not. Nonetheless, these fees and the cost of compliance for these programs as they become more complex are really a death by 1,000 cuts. I think I said that last year as well. California is really driving the little guy out. I hear from the environmental community, I hear from regulators about quote unquote big ag, corporate ag.
You don't hear about that from these regulators.
No. However, these things are, these kinds of things are what are driving the little guy out to a great extent. It's not just here at the Water Board, but it's throughout the state. What we've seen in the last 8 years is a doubling of fees from about $30 billion a year to now $60 billion a year in fees. And so it really is becoming insurmountable. It's, like I said, death by 1,000 cuts. In closing, I understand you have a structural deficit, that you're a fee-based organization, but I don't understand the need to continue to significantly increase workload and instead of focusing on what we're doing right now and trying to do a better job of it. So thank you.
That too. Mr. Wilbur.
Chair Marcus and members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity to address you today. My name is Kirk Wilbur. I'm with the California Cattlemen's Association. While my members are impacted by the broader water rights fee schedule before you today, I would like to, as with last year, focus my attention primarily on the livestock stock pond use registrations issue. As staff noted, while we don't support the increase in the registration fee for livestock stock ponds, we certainly acknowledge that it is a significant improvement over the proposal that was before you last September. I'd like to thank you again for deferring your decision on that fee increase last year until this meeting. And I also want to thank your staff. They are mentioned by name in our comment letter, who have worked with us over the last year. Those meetings have been productive. They've been cordial. And while, again, like Danny, we don't support that fee increase, it is certainly improvement over what was proposed last year.
Did you get 8 people at your meeting?
So there was actually one meeting that neither Bill nor Danny could make, so it was just me, and I think it was 6 members of staff at that one. But I felt a little outnumbered.
We told them to listen.
Hey, they listened. A lot of them.
And it was cordial.
Understanding that you're likely to accept this fee increase despite our opposition today, I do want to make one specific proposal, and that is regarding that fee cap for registrations at 5 registrations per registrant. As was acknowledged by staff, that really only provides relief for 8 registrants that are in the ERIM system. I would suggest lowering that cap to fees for 4 registrations or even fees for 3 registrations. It's a relatively modest impact to your revenue, and it provides relief for more stock pond registrants. More importantly, though, what it does is it lowers the disincentive for folks who are currently out of compliance with this registration requirement to come into compliance. When folks call my office and they're asking about these regulations, it's a pretty easy sell for me to tell them you pay a renewal fee of $100 every 5 years. The higher that fee is, especially if you have numerous ponds or numerous registrations, the less likely you're going to have people voluntarily coming into compliance with that regulatory scheme. So I would urge you to lower that cap to 4 or 3 registrations per individual. Moving on to sort of the broader scope of the water rights fee schedule before you today. As Mr. Merkley mentioned to you, I want you to remain ever mindful of the cumulative impacts of your fees and the cost imposed by your other regulations, as well as regulations from other boards in California. Certainly, while the fee increase today may seem relatively modest, when you consider it in the context of the creep year after year of higher regulatory fees, when you consider the cost of other regulations passed by this board, including the measurement and reporting regulations passed in 2016, as well as the overall regulatory scheme in California, it really can imperil some of those ranching operations in California, some of them 5th generation, 6th generation ranches. It gets harder and harder for them to stay in business as these fees are increased. Again, I recognize, as does Danny, that there are costs associated with administering the water rights program. I know you have to recoup those fees, but it is my hope that in the future you will consider regulatory relief to lower staff's burden, and you can pass that on as savings to the fee payer rather than increasing those fees every year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. I should remember this. How did you settle on 5 as opposed to 4?
Yeah, we have a list. We went through ERMs of how many entities hold how many livestock stock ponds. And essentially, we started with the position that everybody was paying a per registration fee unless we impose a cap to give relief to those for whom they'd be paying an exceedingly high fee because they hold a large number of those stock ponds. So we were starting with the idea that a cap should apply to a large number, somebody holding a large number of stock ponds. When we looked at the number of water rights holders holding each number of rights, the primary, 115 of 154 hold 1 stock pond. And then we have 10 holding two stock ponds each, 12 holding 3, 6 holding 4, 5 holding 5, and then we get to 0 entities holding 6 and 0 holding 7, and then a couple of 1s and a 2 above that. So our thinking was essentially there was a break between those for whom 5 was a cap and then where you hit the next large number. And of course, this will change every year if people choose to make different choices with their stock ponds. But also, so we looked at it that direction going up, and then also looking at it going back down was if we moved down to 4, yes, that would give relief to 5 entities, but then why shouldn't we move it down to 3? And then that would give relief to 6 more. And then pretty soon you're at 1, and there's no cap. I mean, there's only a cap. It doesn't matter how many you have. So that goes back to where we started, which was with the fee applies to the number of registrations that a person holds, because that's where the workload comes in. This program is already, I think Dave already mentioned, even with this, it recoups in the mid-40% of its own cost share of the budget, so we're nowhere near there. So in order to make the actual fee structure meaningful, the cap couldn't swallow that. That was how we ended up at 5.
Thank you. Just wanted to understand it.
That was a good explanation, but it is worth discussing a little more about the statement you made. That's where the workload is. So can you articulate what the workload increase is for staff and if they have one pond versus two.
Sure, so I can talk about that. So a registration is capped at 10 acre feet for storage. So you could actually have 5 ponds on one registration, as long as they were together under 10 acre feet or more. So it's not so much as the ponds, but it's the acre foot basis. But when you get multiple registrations, what can happen is that each of them has to be processed individually for billing, for review to see if they're turning in their annual reporting, which is required by SB 88, to do their renewals, which we have to do, and other administrative functions of the water right, like if they change ownership, for example. So we're having to do that for each individual one, and they require a number of work. So if we put a cap on it, I think that's something that was requested by the subgroup that we met with, and we can accommodate that. It's not really saving staff time. From that perspective, it's not saving staff time to have like a cap. It's not a situation where because it's the same owner, we do less work. We're doing the same amount of work, but we understand to incentivize the program for compliance reasons that it can make sense to have a cap on there so parties don't feel burdened. Another thing I point out is that parties who have multiple registrations probably tend to be the larger operators, right? Because you can only have a certain amount of ponds per 50 acres of land. So you're starting to get larger operators. So there's just a factor to consider there too with the cap that we need to be a little careful with. But I think that we want to incentivize people to come in that are operating without rights. So if it helps that, it's just we need to consider that balance.
There are no economies of scale for this program. It is per registration. That's where the workload is applied.
And the other thing is that sometimes the parties don't even have the registrations like in the same area. You know, you have parties that have different properties in different counties and things. It's just the same primary.
Oh, like different ranches entirely, not just far away on a big ranch.
Right. I mean, it can be both, right?
Oh,
but
right.
it's just pointing out that.
So you're not necessarily
depends what
even
kind of
saving your
business.
gas money.
It depends
is
what kind
you're
of
saying.
business you
to
have.
get there. I didn't realize that.
And also, you were using, the units you were using were registrations and then ponds.
Right, ponds, so that's what I was saying is, so a registration is like a diversion amount. So it's 10 acre feet. There's also a direct diversion rate. But you can have, if you had really small ponds, right, you could have 10 1 acre foot ponds under one registration.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they're not synonymous. It's really, what we're talking about is the workload per registration.
Right, because that's what we have to administer. They're each individual water rights.
Thank you. That was a good explanation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilbur. Ms.
So
Lewis?
I'm sorry, a follow-up question from Ms. Montgomery.
Sorry.
So when you
Also-
say, once in a while I pop up with a question.
I'm sorry. I didn't turn my head to that side.
When you say that, well, let me show the fact that you have to look at each registration individually, is that a consequence of the way our processes are set up, or is that the requirement by law by which we must regulate these registrations?
Right, so the requirements for regulating registrations is in the water code, not in the code of regulations. And it does set out a process of how we are able to review them and issue them, and also how we administer them and how they're renewed. So we do have to do certain processes there. I don't think just because we had 5 of them in front of us from the same owner, it makes it any degree simpler. There's no way to combine that in the code.
So what you're saying is we don't have the flexibility or the discretion to try to develop some sort of economy of scales for multiple ponds being registered by one particular water right
there's
holder.
Things legislatively that could be done, like you could change the small, the livestock stock pond program.
As currently
Right.
structured, you're saying we don't have that flexibility.
Right, because we're limited to 10 acre feet under each right. And then once you get to that cap, so if a person said like, I have, 200 ponds and I want them all covered, they have a way to get them covered. They could get a regular water right permit. But if they want to use this livestock stock pond program, they can only cover 10 acre feet worth of ponds per right. So there's no way to put them all together into.
And I'll add to that, I think the economies of scale is partly built into the statute in that it's not based on a per pond charge, and you can, although you don't have to, combine multiple ponds into one registration, and that's in the statute. So the flexibility to do that is already built into the statute. The flexibility to do more or something different isn't. But there are other processes. There's the regular application process. There's not limits on how many registrations somebody can hold.
Right, and I would also point out that the livestock stock pond program is already a very fast and streamlined process compared to normal applications, right? It was put in place in the late 80s as after they had something called the stock pond certificate program, which was basically just a very simple registration program, and that was phased out, and then now we have the livestock stock pond program since the late 80s. But as long as the party meets the program conditions, they get a set of generalized conditions that apply to everyone. So it's not like we're working them out condition by condition on these. The problem that we usually run into in general in registrations is just that the parties that are working with us aren't that familiar with water rights, and so they fill out their forms incompletely. The cattlemen's and the Farm Bureau have actually been a huge help on that over the years. They have helped us do outreach to those parties. They've even helped them fill out the forms at times, kind of like we've done train the trainer, and then they've helped fill out the forms. So I think the program's working well, and as we heard some of our commenters say, the hard thing is kind of getting the parties in the door. So.
Great, thank you. Ms. Lewis, thanks for your patience.
Good morning. My name is Joy Lewis with the California Strawberry Commission.
Everybody smile when you show up because everybody likes strawberries.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful
Well, the staffers that manage this issue are actually down in the district in meetings, so I'm here to read our comments. Hope I make it in this 3 minutes. Okay, Madam Chair and members of the board, the California Strawberry Commission represents strawberry farmers, shippers, and processors in the state of California. California strawberry farmers produce nearly 90% of the U.S. grown strawberries and contribute more than $2 billion in annual revenue, creating more than 55,000 on-farm jobs and over 70,000 jobs in the supply chain. The Commission appreciates the challenges involved in the State Water Board's budget process, but we have serious concerns surrounding the process for this year's public outreach with stakeholders. The proposed budget shows a new tier and fee increase for growers who are not enrolled in a full-service third-party coalition, which primarily consists of Region 3 growers. The increase of 87 cents to $1.90 per acre represents a 122% increase. Unfortunately, this significant fee increase of a regulated community did not occur in a manner which allowed stakeholders to actively participate. The materials regarding increases to Region 3 growers were not distributed until September 12th, when this meeting's agenda was published. Region 3 growers have had little to no time to respond to this increase, as this information regarding a new tier for Region 3 was not in the printed meeting materials sent out for the August 22nd meeting. September 20th is the date of the State Water Board's budget adoption, and yet agricultural representatives from the Central Coast will not be in attendance, as they have been asked to make a presentation to the Region 3 Board in preparation of the ILRP. We do not believe that this oversight was intentional, but an oversight it is. Stakeholders deserve to be aware of increased costs, especially if they are singled out. The State Water Board members are aware that Region 3 has opposed all-encompassing third-party coalitions for several iterations of the agricultural discharge order. We ask that these growers not be penalized on top of this by surprise fee increases from the State Board. We urge the Board to accept the staff's recommendation to postpone consideration of the adoption of the newly proposed tier structure for the irrigated ag program. Commission representatives look forward to working with the Board staff in a collaborative manner to meet the Board's goal of a balanced, equitable budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we have already accepted the recommendation of staff to postpone it until the October 16th, 17th.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Sorry if that message that closing of the loop didn't get through.
Yeah, there's also.
I didn't want to interrupt you as you were reading.
There's also confusion. I think that pertains to item number 5, and right now we're listening to item number 4, which is the water rights fees. So that's
fine.
That's understandable cross-pollination of issues, but okay.
And just for clarity on the record, we'll just make sure that Ms. Lewis's comments are reflected in item 5 for the
why don't we do
board
that?
package.
That would be great. And our response. That'd be great. Thank you. All right. So that concludes the public comment on item number, now I'm afraid to say what number anything is, right? 4. 1, 2, 5. Yeah, sorry. You get the reference. I know you always do. That's why I do it at you. Sorry, just amuse each other here. All right, comments, questions, motions.
Good. There was a statement in comments that on the temporary diversion for groundwater for the Sigma-related projects, that having an ongoing renewal fee based on acre feet, quote unquote, makes no fiscal sense. In our discussions, my understanding is that there's still the staff costs of permit management of the renewal. Each year is different. So I don't know if I really agree with that statement, but could you explain what fiscal sense it makes to do a per acre foot renewal fee for these sustainable groundwater projects?
Sure. So one thing to point out is that Yolo County Flood Control Water Conservation District, who came to us, they were the only party that we've had who has had renewals. They've had 2 years worth, initial year and then 2 years worth of renewals, and they came to us with this proposal. And they were looking in their overall fee structure that they proposed, that we have as our nomination for the fee, to have this combination of one of the fees, the initial fee, that was based on the amount that's requested, which is our traditional matrix, which is because we're doing staff work based on someone who wants to divert 10,000 acre feet. We have to look at the impact of 10,000 acre feet to senior diverters in the environment. But they also were very interested in the fact that that 10,000 acre feet in any given year, it might not be there for them. And they've definitely been seeing that in their temporary permits. They would like to divert 40,000 or 70,000 acre feet. It's just not there because you have to have the right water year for these peak flows. So their renewal fee.
Well, it's not even the right water year, it's the right water year in that location, since we know that also varies so crazily.
Right. Some of these people are going for water that's available very infrequently. So that second part of the fee is the way for us to test out that idea, is that, so it's a $1,500 renewal fee, which is less than $5,000 base fee. So right there, we're acknowledging that renewals are a lot less work. But the per acre foot charge is 20 cents, but it's only 20 cents per acre foot if they actually divert. So if they don't divert at all, they're only paying $1,500, right? So I think it's that marrying of like how to have a fee that moves forward. I look at this fee as something that we're testing out to see how it works. The other thing to point out is that traditionally in water rights, we charge a base fee and then we have a per acre foot charge because you have increasing complexity as you have larger project size. You have more possibility for risk to the environment and to the senior diverters. So to not have a per acre foot charge is kind of to set aside that concept. And some of these parties might come in for 100,000 acre feet of water, right, eventually. I could see that happening, especially as we have the Sigma GSAs ramp up, and especially if they can cover large areas. And then the other point that we already made is that it is really a significant amount of staff time to process the renewals. In the way it's written in the water code is it's the same exact process, whether it's a renewal or initial. So we have to go through all the public noticing, the objections. I admit the process, the analysis can be easier because we've already done it once. That's why we would charge less on that base fee, but it's still there. The other thing is that we've seen this already in the few that we've had. At least one of them, as they implemented a project that was basically a pilot and an unknown, they found new concerns. And then those new concerns were brought up in the second year when we went to renewal in the objections. So we got these more complex objections that makes it more difficult. So.
Well, that's a good explanation because it isn't just a simple renewal. We learn things as we go, and also there's a due process in water rights for other water rights holders and the issue of potential effects on fish and wildlife. So
I think the piece that gets lost sometimes, and not to belabor the point, is there's not only more to it, but this isn't a fee-for-service thing. There's a value, whether folks acknowledge it or not, to having a well-run water rights system, and we're doing it on a shoestring, even though we've been able to grow over the last few years compared to what if we had a humming water rights system that was fully adjudicated, everybody knew, a lot of these things would take less time because they would be ministerial. But the nature of our system is such that everything is a one-off or presented as a one-off. But the integrity of that system is actually important to everybody. It's just like our conversation about safe drinking water. It's in everybody's interest to have a well-run regulatory system, whether they recognize it or will say it or not. So there's some margin that's for that as well.
Exactly. It's the sort of the fixed costs of a well-run infrastructure.
It might be worth highlighting the disparity ultimately in the staff time that it took with and what the previous charges were with the fee. So, how much did that roughly what was the deficit essentially for the processing of these fees and what we were recouping necessarily, and what it was costing us for the staff time?
Sure. So we did track, we're not fee for service, but we tracked our first 2 temporary permits that we did. And interestingly, they were both about the same amount of time. It was $40,000 in staff time. And we charged those temporary permits, I think, just over $100. So, I mean, that's a reflection. In renewal, it would be less, but still considerable, because a lot of that time is things like getting ready for public noticing, going through objections. If there is no objections, that makes it easier, but you still have, regardless of if we don't receive objections, we have to make sure Fish and Wildlife, there isn't harm there, and the senior diverter issues. So.
There's a heavy burden that you're called upon to take on for this and other things that people underestimate, I think, a lot of the time. Not understandably, but. All right, do I have a motion?
Yeah, I'll move staff recommendation with change sheets number 1 and 2 for the proposed water rights fees, 2018, 2019.
Second.
All right, any other comments?
No, thanks for all of your work, staff, but really changing the dialogue on stakeholder involvement in the fee structure, and it's difficult work. You've done really well, and thanks to all this constructive input from our stakeholders in this important matter.
It's fundamentally different dialogue than it was a number of years ago, so I know you've put in an awful lot of time, which is great. It can always be better, but it's great. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest we take a 10-minute break before item number 5, which will be the water quality regulatory fees. So we'll be back at 10:55. Maybe by then I can string words together. right, we're back. It is 11 o'clock. Sorry for the delay. And we are on to item number 5. I'm just double checking myself here.
So before David gets into his presentation, just to be clear, we did withdraw from consideration that one item to add another tier to the agricultural fee structure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our presentation. We had some last minute discussions with the stakeholders. We've identified a defect in our public process outreach. Basically, it was, we need to do some improvements to our agenda to more specifically call out what we're going to talk about in meetings, and then do some more targeted outreach to certain segments of our stakeholder community. So, and then on the other side, they've also agreed, as you've seen, to be more engaged in our process. They looked at our agenda. We've actually been discussing this since June, but they didn't really see it clearly on the agenda because we didn't put it there. And but it took a little mini crisis, but we're at the point now where we're both willing to engage. So
Well, that's great. And also you have the
good.
date conflict, so people can't be in two places. So
There was
as a courtesy, that's probably
that issue as well. So we're fully committed to involving everybody in the discussions.
So good morning again. And for the record, my name is David Checkerley from the State Water Board Division of Administrative Services. And also assisting me today is Clint Osterhage, also from the Division of Administrative Services. Before you today, again, is a consideration of resolution adopting emergency regulations, revising the core regulatory water quality fee schedules. And as John mentioned, we also have, and we are requesting that the approval of this fee schedule along with a change sheet number 1. And we'll go over that. And staff will also revise the agenda item to conform with the change sheet. So again, we'll just kind of start with, again, as I mentioned in water rights, we had several stakeholder meetings, same dates as the water rights. We also had individual stakeholders come in throughout the year and meet with us. I believe it was in the middle of July, I believe July 17th. We also had an all ag meeting, discuss some of the ag issues. And so, and just recently, of course, with some of these adoptions or these proposed adoptions of these fee schedules, we had several stakeholders come in and discuss the program and discuss fees. Just to kind of highlight on the fund condition for the waste discharge permit fund. Again, as I showed in the water rights side, here's the WDPF, and as you can see, if there was no changes made in fiscal year 18-19, the fund would go into the negative. We'd have a negative reserve about 0.6 and a ending balance of in a negative almost $1 million. With these fee changes and with these proposals in front of you, we would end the reserve about 4%, and that's basically what we ended the reserve last year, about 4%. Keeping in mind that we would be proposing these increases, but at the same time, we would be looking at using about $7.6 million of our reserve to offset some of these costs. And and that's the message, and we'll another slide here I'll really dive into, but that's been the message to stakeholders over these last several years, is that, again, costs continue to drive up, and we've been, as fee staff and the recommendations from the stakeholders have been kind of doing this juggling act of one, keeping the cost down by using the reserve to offset those costs, but again, those costs don't go away and they move to the future year, and that becomes the baseline, the starting point for that next fiscal year. And we'll demonstrate that in another slide here. One thing I do want to touch basis on is that adjusting beginning balance of $13.8 million, it's definitely a high amount, but that also includes approximately about $9 million from a one-year accounting adjustment related to the Water Board's conversion to the State of California's fiscal management system.
Oh, it's a fiscal artifact.
Exactly. So currently our normal standard practices when we had CalSTARS is that A portion of this revenue we refer to as advanced collections. And so money that was collected in this fiscal year or in a prior fiscal year would move to the next fiscal year. And so, for example, like that $9 million, if we were still on CalSTARS, nearly 50% of that would then be posted to the future fiscal year. Because of, again, new accounting practices with Fiscal and the new rules, Fiscal does not allow us to do advanced collections. So this will be the first year and the last year of doing this. That whole $9 million, we can't post any of that to the next fiscal year. So we're posting it to this year, and we're actually using a large sum of this basically to...
Could be the reserve for next year.
Exactly. So...
I guess we're going to have all sorts of crosswalks because of that transition. All right.
Exactly. I mean, it definitely has an impact on our accounting, but then also us with fees working with accounting on determining, our revenue levels and things like that. Basically, just our budget cost drivers. One thing I do want to point out is our staffing levels in the waste discharge permit fund have not increased much over the last several years. I'll say that. I mean, there was a budget change proposal in the ag program last year to add 5 additional positions. And then, of course, with the ramp up and the implementation of the cannabis program, there was and a new program which was added into the WPF. It was 65 positions over a 2-year fiscal year span, with 53 of those being implemented last year, and then this year, the remaining 12. So other than that, the waste discharge permit fund staffing has stayed pretty constant. So when we look at a lot of our increases in costs, it's basically those costs of increase of those employees that are in the program. And this year, the majority of our classifications, the contract negotiations through the unions and things that are out of our hands, they've received new contracts, and there's additional employee compensation in there. There's healthcare, there's retirement, there's our pro rata cost. There's what's known as a pension buy down through CalPERS that went through a year ago, where the Department of Finance is assessing revenue from each of our funds to help cover our pension buy down. And it's anyone that's basically in the CalPERS. It's not just the state, but local agencies and utilities, anyone that's in the CalPERS system. So all those costs are driving basically our costs to increase in the waste discharge permit fund. Here you'll just notice that the BCP change of almost $4 million, but that's again the increased cost for the additional positions for the cannabis program. So this is the slide I kind of wanted to highlight here. And things are kind of taking place in what we are proposing here in the for item number 5. So if you look at some of our programs here in 16-17 and 17-18, you'll definitely see where there were required fee increases. And I'll just kind of highlight there on top with the WDR. In 16-17, there was a need for a 3% increase. However, staff was able to come up with a proposal, look at the reserve, and offset that. And we took that to the board that we could absorb that cost in that year. And same thing with 17-18. Now we're here in 18-19, and it was, if I look at this, our baseline going into it for 18-19 was about 13.2%. And then with additional costs of nearly 5%, the WDR program needs about an 18.6% increase. With that said, what staff's proposal is to knock that in half and defer half of that to the next fiscal year, or at least, again, that being my starting point, and use the reserve, as I mentioned, about $7 million of that, and offset some of these increases. So for the WDR program, we'd be looking at about a 9.5% increase. Going down the line there with like land disposal, looking at our fee schedules, we're generating enough revenue with the fee schedules compared to the actual staff and expenditures in that program. So we are not proposing any increases with land disposal. I will say, though, that last year, though, and this has been going on for the last couple of years, we actually had a discount for land disposal. And so what the fee schedule would be doing this year is actually removing a 1-year reduction from the land disposal tipping and non-tipping program. So they would go back to their original fee schedules. Water quality, again, we would be splitting that increase in half. Stormwater is another one. Over the years, we've been generating more revenue than expenditures. Definitely in an upscale economy, we see it with construction permits and things like that. And same thing with tipping fees, right? More construction, we see more tipping, so we see more permits and more revenue coming in that way. MPDS, same thing, we would look at splitting that cost. The confined animal feeding, same situation. Last year, they needed almost a 10% increase. And however, we were able to offset the increase in the fees. And the required has slightly gone up. And I'll kind of touch basis on the reason for that is because the confined animal feeding program, traditionally we're getting a lot of, the revenues coming in from the cattle and the dairy industries. But in the last year and a half, we've had resolutions adopted by Region 5 for bovine, for poultry. And so we are receiving applications and receiving revenue. So that revenue has now been applied into the confined animal feeding program. It's helped kind of offset part of the increases for that, help subsidize that. So looking in the big picture, once we get more of those orders and more of the applicants come in, help kind of offset and more revenue. So looking at it, it's not where it's, the dairy's paying for the program, basically. Again, it's a confined animal feeding program. And then finally, before that, let's a cannabis program.
Glad we're not in the Carolinas right now, speaking of confined animal feeding.
True. The cannabis program, again, it's actually been 2 years now because 2 years ago we had came to you for a fee schedule for our regional board orders, and then the statewide order was adopted last year, and we had a fee schedule implemented. This year, we're proposing no fee increase. However, we're closely monitoring our revenues for the cannabis program. I will say that internally, staff it has formed a work group, and we're looking at the revenues. We're looking at the fee schedules. Kind of keep in mind that the come July 1, 2019, everyone had enrolled in the regional order. Will now have to enroll in the statewide order. And our statewide order fee schedules are actually lower than our regional board orders. So that will be taken in consideration. We're really looking at our enrollment. And then, again, looking at our funding sources, over the last couple of years, we had special funds. We had general fund. We had what we refer to now as the California Tax Fund, which is all California Cannabis Tax Fund. And so, again, we have formed a work group. We're going to be discussing some of these issues and going out, talking to our stakeholders on the cannabis side. Also then, preparing documentation and messaging on our message to the Department of Finance on funding this program. Ag program. Last year, again, there was a budget change proposal, and it was roughly 22%, meaning of that, 16% was to cover the BCP for the 5 positions, and then another 6% was the normal cost. And the board voted on and decided that we'd raise it 16% and defer that 6% cost. So that's what you see there in 17-18. And now we need basically about a 17% increase in this program. But we are proposing that fees would only be raised, kind of split that in half, nearly 9%, about 8.9%. That would raise the per acre foot charge from, 87 cents to 95 cents, yes, per acre. And so this kind of brings me to part of the change sheet, basically, where we currently have 3 tiers. And so what our change sheet would do is basically our tier 1, where it's a group that's been approved by the State Water Board and manages the fee collections and all the other workload that's involved. Their fee would go up by the 8.9%. And same with our tier 3. So the tier 3 is when a discharge is not a member of a group that's been approved by the state water board. So basically, the water board is doing all the work and regulating that individual farmer. We have a fee schedule set up, so each of those categories within there would go up by 8.9%. Our current tier 2, basically, and we have no one in this group right now, but it basically provides all the same services as tier 1. So coordinating water quality monitoring and best management practices development, training and implementation, assisting members with complying with the WDRs or the waivers of WDRs, but they're not approved to manage actually collections. So that basically means that the state water board staff would actually send out the invoices and do the collections from those individual farmers. Our proposal is increasing that base fee from $100 to $250. And then this increase of base fee would help cover our administrative time for billing and collecting the fees for individual growers. We're also, though, looking at it and looking at the metrics of the fee schedule, we'd actually propose lowering the per acre foot charge from $1.47 to $1.43, because the calculation came out that it's 1.5 is $1.43 on top of the 95 cents that we're proposing. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's no one currently in the tier 3 structure. So finally here, just a few additional items. We have a federal reduction on our ambient monitoring program, so our SWAMP and our gamma program. So we would be proposing to decrease that from 10.3% to 9.3% for fiscal year 18-19. Our continuing outreach, we would definitely be working with the confined animal feeding facilities. Program staff and the fee staff have been discussing possibly of potentially going to a different structure, maybe more on an animal equivalent fee schedule. And we're the base, we're working with the regional board staff on this, and we're close on bringing in stakeholders and start having that discussion. Again, there's continuous discussion with Ag Lands program, and definitely we'll be forming work groups with the growers down in the Region 3 to discuss, again, the additional tier that we'll have those discussions. And as I mentioned earlier, cannabis stakeholders, we're definitely have our discussions with the cannabis program stakeholders on fees moving forward on that program. We're also looking at...
Can I interrupt you for a second?
No problem.
So can you clarify, because I may have misspoken earlier today. So you're recommending, as I see, again, from the email, that the aspect that was raised by the Region 3 folks be postponed, but what are you asking us within this to do, still asking us to do today about ag?
So we're keeping the
I
current
think I understand
fee
it, but I want to be clear
structure.
to everybody listening.
Yeah, so we're keeping the current fee structure. Our proposal was to add a different tier. We're removing that proposal. So we're proposing to keep the existing fee structure, but to add a several cent increase basically per acre to cover the cost deficit in that program that David described
Okay, that's
earlier.
what I thought. Okay, so what I said was accurate, but it's not necessarily for the October 16th meeting.
No,
like I said, because I was conflating it with the Salton Sea.
Yeah, the rate increase we're still proposing for today. And maybe
But the comeback, you'll tell us when you're going to come back after you meet with folks.
Yeah, well, why don't, since we're talking about it now, if you don't mind, why don't we just talk about it?
Just briefly.
Just briefly.
Because we're on a time schedule.
That was one of the questions we had for you, is what your preference would be for us to go and do the stakeholder process with the Region 3 stakeholders and come back. I think probably 3 to 6 months is a minimum. I wouldn't recommend October. The fall is really a hard time to talk to the agricultural community, simply because it's harvest. It's and I don't want to interrupt their busiest time of the year to have them take time out to talk to us, and if we can delay it a little bit. So
I'm fine with leaving it to you, but somebody needs to follow. We have her email hopefully on the card. Someone needs to follow up with Ms. Lewis, because I misspoke and I apologize.
we will definitely follow up with the Strawberry Commission is one of the groups we want to talk to. There are several other coalitions or grower groups in that area that we also want to talk to. So I guess in terms of the timing, like I said, 3 to 6 months, because I don't want to short circuit the process either. And even 3 to 6 months, there's some practical issues that come up if we bill once. If we come back to you and you adopt another fee schedule mid-cycle, it poses the potential of us having to bill twice, and then the growers have to collect twice or the Preservation Inc. has to collect twice. We have to go to the Office of Administrative Law twice. So almost what I would recommend is that we jumpstart the dialogue with these, turn the dial to 11 and get that going really early in the process, but maybe not come back until September again on a normal process. So well before that, though, in our discussions, they should know what we'll be recommending in September.
I mean,
So, but again, it's wholly up to you. If you really do want us to really move on this, we can accommodate that.
yeah, I'm happy to defer to you. I just think the engagement is important, as well as the engagement with the regional board, because some of our issues there are perception issues as well that we probably need to just spend a little time on.
Yeah, and we can also, and we're also discussing not a similar issue with the Rice Commission. We're continuing dialogue with them. So we may be able to wrap a lot of this together, because even the existing coalitions have, it's an ongoing issue that people bring up. Am I really paying for other people other than myself?
No, everyone.
So
can
it's a
do that.
broader issue.
That used to be stormwater, but now they're not, as I recall when I first got here.
Yeah, and Glenn just reminded me, there's a lot of activity in the ag sector. The San Joaquin order came up, CV salts. They're peripheral to some of what we're doing in the fees, but there are additional pressures on the ag community.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
No,
digress.
no,
But I
that's
just wanted to make
actually
sure I got it right.
worth discussing, though, because that was a lot of the comments that we received. And I wanted to do another clarification. You mentioned, Mr. Giacarelli, in your comments that one of the tiers, there were no enrollees in the ag proposal. There's the 3 tiers. One is if you're part of a coalition or where the fee collection payment's done. It's tier 1. Tier 2 is when we have to do the fee collection. And then tier 3 is if they're not part of a state board approved program. But in passing, it sounded like you said there was a tier where we have no enrollees.
So I was referring to the current tier 2. So the current tier 2, which the group is doing everything in tier 1 except managing the actual invoices and doing that. That's the current tier where no one's in.
Okay.
No
so
enrolling.
And there may be in the future, though. This is still a developing program. We expect other flavors of groups to pop up as additional regions, adopt their permits. So we try to make our fee schedule reflect what's happening in the real world. But I think that one was primarily a contingency. I mean, there are coalitions that pop up, and there is that brief period that they may exist before they get approved by the state.
Right. So I see. So it is a kind of a contingency tier that right now doesn't apply to anyone, but it could in the future.
Exactly.
And okay. And there is an incentive I see there to go to tier 1 to not burden us with administrative tasks and likewise have permittees pay for us doing administrative tasks that could be otherwise done by a local group.
That's correct. That's correct.
So it seems like the incentive is working if nobody's in tier 2 currently. Tier 1 is selected. So that's a testament.
Occasionally we'll have a grower who will not get along with their coalition, but there is that significant financial incentive for them to get over that and get into a coalition.
Good. Thanks for this discussion on that. Real quick then, also just another clarifying question on the current slide you have up. The federal reduction for ambient monitoring lowered. So these are confusing terms that there's a reduction and then it's being lowered. This is an add-on to all permit programs. Is there a swamp, or, an ambient monitoring related add-on to all permit fees, or is it just MPDES? Or
it's all programs for swamp and gamma.
Right.
Every program is baked into their base fee.
Right.
The feds, because of a lawsuit, we're not able to charge them that portion of that fee, so we reduce it. We analyze it every year or every 2 years, and it turns out that that portion of the program is less for ambient monitoring, so the feds are going to get a lower discount. So it is a lower and a discount together.
Okay, because it's an add-on, but the percentages of what is 10.3% of?
That's the ambient monitoring portion of our total expenditures.
Okay. Okay.
So basically, and again, it's all rolled up in a percentage, but the surface water, like your MPDS and stormwater would get the swamp surcharge, and then the groundwater programs, the WDRs, the land disposal, they would get the gamma, the groundwater ambient monitoring surcharges. It was just the percentages, kind of rolled up all together, so we, put it that way. And then each year, again, when we look at that total cost, as Glenn mentioned, we calculate how that spread comes out, and this year it's gone down by about 1%.
Right. In terms of the part of the fee that folks are paying for either groundwater or surface water ambient monitoring this year is a relatively lower amount.
Correct.
Just the way things have penciled out. Okay. Thank you.
So just to make sure that we're all clear, the outreach will intensify with the Region 3 folks, but we will not bring back a change in the fee structure until next year.
That's what you recommend.
Yeah, I think that is a good idea. There's a lot of, as you've articulated, a lot of discussions underway, complexities of evolving programs, and your earlier intent to better calibrate our fees to the program staff effort. This makes sense that on all those fronts, we do this carefully and over the next year, and you'll have a range of options folks have considered and that we can consider. That makes sense to me. 'Cause it just, in reading the comments and being familiar with Region 3, frankly, it just didn't feel like it was completely cooked yet in terms of, how we could explain program staff expenditures. It just didn't feel like we had done all the homework we should do. So I appreciate the deferring of that action.
All right, let's go to our speakers. 3 minutes. No one's asked for more than that anyway. We have Bob Gore for Fresno and the Wine Grape Growers, Bruce Haudeshelt for the Sacramento Valley Water Quality Coalition, JP Cataviella from Dairy Cares, Paul Sousa from Western United Dairymen.
Good morning again. Bob Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of those listed, and channeling a couple of very large stakeholder calls, including an all-industry group we've had in the last couple days. The fund, the Water Quality Fund, Waste Discharge Fund, the expenses are growing 20% this year over last year. The permits, as you can see, many of them are over 9% with like increases pending. What we'd propose is to get ahead of this, and what we've been working with staff on recently is turning the February stakeholder meeting, for which we congratulate the board and staff for continuing to persevere, into a planning session, a partnership with the physical staff, with program staff, and with regional staff to try to develop a 3-year program for regulatory certainty. So we're no longer developing rates 3 months in arrears, but actually ahead of time. And this proceeding would be tweakage, as opposed maybe, instead of say a 9% rate increase, it'd be 9.1 or 8.1, pending last minute adjustments. We understand BCPs cannot be discussed until they're approved. We understand that, but nonetheless, you run a business in advance. And what all of the stakeholders need is some sort of certainty, as in, your rate increase for the next 3 years looks like it'll be 3 to 4%, so we can plan. We'd also appreciate input and developing these programs like we do at CV Salts together in a collaborative manner, as opposed to what we fear greatest is these program expansions will become on the natural. Yeah, we've got to add 3 positions. We've got to add 4 with no stakeholder input. And we are paying the bills. To close, a word about agriculture. In the official opinion of CDFA, farmers are bearing an historic regulatory burden. Fallowing in some regions may approach 40%, at least 25%. And I think I've alluded to this before. I was approached by a major grower, someone who's devoted his life to achieving down in Coalinga. He walked up to me and said, "Bob, why is growing food a crime?" And it was very evocative. So we need to work closely with ag particularly. Thank you.
Harsha?
Morning, Madam Chairman, members of the board. And
Morning.
Madam Chairman, I have to thank you for, you pronounced my name extremely well.
I just tried to say it fast.
Yeah, no, and it works. So I want to put this book up here. Rancher, Farmer, Fisherman. It's a book by Miriam Horn, and, with an homage to the Romagers. And it's about the Conservation Heroes of America Heartland.
Didn't know that.
When we see each other next time, it will be fall. Yesterday it was 35 degrees in Sierra Valley, where we had a field tour, where we had folks from the Assistant Executive Officer, Adam Lappitz, and the Irrigated Lands folks, seeing how agriculture, the irrigated pasture, the alfalfa, is actually benefits the ecosystem. So if I go and tell them that we have to do this fee increase, and Danny's right, death of 1,000 cuts, they have ponds, right? They're facing SGMA costs. If I go up there and tell them, well, hey, there's $9 million that have to be added to the program for staff retirement, they don't get it. They want projects. They want to see the projects that they work with Ken Tate on and other things like that. You have our opposition letter. Sac Valley is the largest and the longest contributor to the agricultural program. I try to be polite and respectful. I understand you have a lot of challenges before you. Don't increase this fee. Continue what you did last year by looking at an allocation method. We contributed last year to 5, the BCP. Now, maybe half of that person was in the Sacramento Valley. Maybe one of those people were in the Central Valley, but it went to other regions of the state. And so we're subsidizing. Stop. Change the allocation methodology. You've committed to that. Your staff is committed to that. I appreciate the recognition that's going on that the coalitions are doing a lot of the work, and there should be credit. So you get a credit because we collect fees, because we do groundwater studies, because we do a lot of work related to that. And I'm not an economist, but it's pretty simple. As the fee goes up, participation goes down. That's not good for water quality. Did I say there were 3 people in my meeting? I think I did. But, everybody's talking about how many. Danny, you got 8 people in your meeting. Well, you're statewide, so. Really, in all sincerity, folks want to see things on the ground. It's hard to explain to them what this state water quality fee that, might as well call it $1 now. You have 14,000 acres of alfalfa or irrigated pasture, you're contributing $14,000. That's real money on top of everything else that comes out of the same pocket. I'm going to end there and ask you not to approve this, to continue the process to look at a fair and equitable allocation methodology.
Thank you. JP, hi.
And I also appreciate the board chair's ability to pronounce my last name, although I fear it's because I've been here too many times. Good to be here to see you and the rest of the board members this morning. I'm here for Dairy Cares, a coalition of 20 organizations or so that represent dairy farmers, milk processors, and other affiliates within the dairy industry. We respectfully oppose the fee increase that's been proposed today. We do appreciate the efforts of staff to explain all the reasons during the several workshops we had this year. Our biggest concern really for dairy is that almost all of the fee increase appears to be a result of declining revenue from dairies. So what's happening is less money is coming in to the State Water Board as more dairies go out of business, and then the lost revenue is then passed on to the remaining dairies. And this has been going on for years. And as this continues, it creates a sort of a perverse situation where, the economic burdens of the dairy industry, which are putting it out of business, are increasing on the remaining dairies.
Well, as you know, I'm sensitive to the pressures on the dairy industry, but isn't it a bit of both? A bit of it is maybe people going out of business, but they're also being acquired by other dairies, so they're still here. They're part of a bigger dairy then.
Right, but that
the
bigger
cows
dairy
are.
then takes on all of its cost plus the costs that were passed on from that dairy that went out of business. And I think it's important to understand that this creates a much smaller burden for the program staff. Since 2008, 521 dairies have come out. That means 521 fewer inspections, a lot less work. There's 300,000 fewer dairy animals in the state than there were in 2008. And yet during that time, all we've seen is fee increases. There haven't been any cutbacks or reductions in program staff. And we know the regional board, we don't know exactly how much different it is because it's not explained in this, but we know they're not working on dairy as much because they've been busy working on other things, including the adoption of 2 general orders, one for poultry, one for bovine facilities that were referred to earlier. Those haven't really realized the revenue yet, and one of the things we would like to see is a better understanding of the relationship between the time that those folks are spending on these general order activities and the fee increases that are being proposed, because everyone's getting the same fee increase across this. And for revenue, that there's also revenue that's figured in, but if it's getting figured in, then why are we seeing a fee increase? So we don't understand it. There is a water code section 13260 D1D that requires that the state board consider, quote, the pricing mechanism of the commodity produced. It's noteworthy that since 2014, according to the Department of Food and Agriculture, the average price of milk paid is well below the cost of production. So if one were considering that statute, we're losing money the last 3 years. So given the reduced number of dairies, given the expected revenue increase from newly regulated folks, and given the increase being proposed to all categories of confined animal facility regulatory permit holders, it's difficult for us to believe that Water Code 13260 was adequately considered in this, and we think it should be, and the counting of the time spent by program staff on these programs should be put forward before fee increases are adopted. Thank you.
My understanding is going back to you don't have to go back to the slide, but going back to the slide, as part of this is a deferred increase from prior years.
Yes, the majority of it is.
About.
And the slide, I'm not sure I have it up here. I believe the increase from this year to last year is about 3 or 4%. And again, if it wasn't for that additional revenue that's coming from those orders of the bovine and the, there we go. So if you were to look at the required increase of 12.2 this year, and last year was nearly 10%, well, that's about 2.4% of the basically additional cost. That 2.4 is probably more around 5% if it wasn't for that additional revenue that we've gotten in from bovine and from the poultry orders. And so that is being calculated in, and it's self-offsetting that. Now, again,
I just remember the conversation that we were deferring and that this was going to happen this year. So that's all. I don't know what I'm remembering from before, but I remember.
Right.
So that was the point I wanted to make. Mr. Souza.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. My name is Paul Souza. I am with Western United Dairymen. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to comment here today, and I also appreciate staff and the work staff has done to provide us information on the fees and the meetings throughout the years. I'm here to oppose the fee increase for confined animal facilities, especially for dairies. Some of that you've heard. The industry has lost about 500 dairies in the last decade, and you're correct. The 500 is actually out, like completely gone. Not somebody else bought that dairy and took it over. So number of dairy families in the business has decreased by far more than that. There are dairies that have gone out of business, were purchased by the neighboring dairy, and so the number of families in the business is smaller and is consolidating. Yet fees have continued to go up dramatically during that same time. The Water Board is not accounting for the nearly 30% reduction in the workload for dairies that have gone out of business during that time. Also, recent years, the Water Board staff has been focusing its time on non-dairy confined animal facilities, writing WDRs and processing NOIs. I understand there is some revenue, but not all of that revenue. For example, NOIs were just due for the bovine facilities. I don't think they're going to get fees this fall, and so that's not accounted for, although there is some revenues from NOIs, I believe. Staff can correct me if I'm wrong there. I'm not sure how much time staff is spending on those permits, but in my experience in working with staff on dairies, they certainly a significant amount of their time is being directed to other programs and to the other operations. The dairy industry is facing difficult times. We have not been profitable. Dairies are operating at a loss. Also, the dairy industry is doing a lot of the work, groundwater monitoring and other things that we're doing in outreach to help the regulators in having a better program and having their program work better. So for those reasons, I oppose fee increases for dairy this year. My suggestion is to use reserves until fees from non-dairy confined animal facilities start coming in from regular annual fees in supporting the work going on in those programs. Thank you, and I look forward to what you can do for us. Thank you.
Right. Questions? Comments?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the confined animal facility figures, you know, where you go back last year there on the slide that's up, where it was a 9.8% required increase to balance that program. We deferred to this year any increases, but it didn't go up linearly, and you were just discussing that. It didn't go from 10, you know, to 20% required increase, but more like 12.2. So if we were to go forward with a proposed increase that you have of 6.2, there is a chance with the changing revenue that the following year of proposed 6.0% may not be required if there's more revenue coming in.
That's correct. If we get more revenue again from the other orders that are being adopted, and that's again what's keeping the amount down this year is because of revenue we've gotten from poultry and the anticipated revenue we're already putting in, as mentioned, as the NOIs and those applications will come in this year. We're projecting that revenue to come in for the dairies for fiscal year 18-19.
Yeah, it's just an interesting insight that, and yet we heard earlier a discussion and even from the board members, you know, that we'd like to see a more predictable program of a steady cost of living style increase in fees every year, right? So that I see a dichotomy here. There's some who say don't increase fees, period, ever, you know, and which is not realistic considering just cost of living increases. And yet by using reserves and deferring fee increases and, you know, and really acknowledging that desire out there of not having increased fees, you end up putting it off, and then we're facing double-digit % increases. And so
I remember those when I first got here.
Right, you had the drinking water program, had a big adjustment. This year, we're not seeing the drinking water fees increase at all, for instance, but that was because of the big adjustment. Anyway, I feel like we have to manage expectations here with our fee payers that expect a regular increase in fees from now on. You know, it's just reality. It's cost of living. And let's, you know, get away from the abrupt changes where we can. We can recognize economic challenges, as we have since I've been on the board 6 years. You know, we have acknowledged, and you can see it on this table, that we've acknowledged economic challenges with the fee structure. But I think we have to get folks used to the idea that we're not going to have a real static fee program, and it's in everybody's best interest not to, so that we don't shock the system going down the road. So
until the legislature changes how we're funded.
Right, that's true.
Because this isn't that much fun.
That's right. We got marginalized to the fee-supported system, you know, through.
It's not great for anybody.
And I think that brings us back to Bob Gore's point about how Bob and I have been having this conversation about that first stakeholder meeting we have in February, where, yes, at that point we have an idea of the proposed budget and what's in that budget and basically our baseline of our costs for that year. So at that time, and we can go out and at that point basically say that, you know, it's a 5% increase. It's going to be cost of living every year for about 5%. And then as we move through the fiscal year, again, some of the BCPs may not be in play yet, so it's confidential, so we can't talk to stakeholders about that. But as they, you know, move forward, then it's been, you know, the additional costs that come in. Now, one thing that's somewhat tricky at that point, though, is early on is, our revenue levels, although we have projections, we'll do invoices starting, 1st of November. So we'll have a couple of months of actual invoice data and revenue data. So we have to kind of take that into place. So there's not only the expenditures of projecting that at that point, but also kind of projecting the revenue. But I agree. I think at that point we can basically go out in front of the stakeholders and say, look, it's going to be about a 5% increase this year.
So let me jump in because we need to remember that we may have a 3 to 4% increase in costs, but we're deferring pretty much every area by half of what we need. So you're going to have more than that 3% cost next year because you've deferred half of the increase this year. So we don't want to give people the impression that it's just the cost of living, where it's the cost of living plus the deferments of the past few years.
Well, I also think I'm part of the value, and I really do see the great improvement in all the work you all have put into this, I think, has been great, as well as all the time stakeholders have spent, as well as the time spent talking about programs coming out of the cost of compliance work that Board Member Dodek championed. I mean, the merging of the two, but precision's not something that we're going to be able to get to. Much better is much better. And I think, I see the need for follow-up conversations so that folks do understand the methodology if they don't, and that's usually more than one or two conversations. But figuring out how to get into this kind of conversation where folks are projecting, you can never say what a governor and the legislature are going to do on our budget and how they're going to choose to fund it. But the more we build that comprehension and give folks the chance to give us a different idea, which folks have done successfully through the course of this, then it's great. It's just hard because we have to make a decision that covers our costs as best we can, and that estimates as best we can without it being a precise fee for service, because that is not what it is. We're trying to get it in a margin of balance, not precision. Because that would take so much more time. It would cost everybody so much more. We'd have to have a whole phalanx of folks.
It would, and it would erode customer service, in my opinion. If we go to fee for service, that takes away the flexibility we have to really be responsive to a dynamic environment and to serve the rate payers, the fee payers accordingly. So, and thanks, Mr. Bishop, for pointing that out, that this is a compromise proposal. This is not going to cover our costs. This is going to be another example. Now, I've done this many years in a row of deferring, having programs be completely whole and drawing down reserves. And in any public enterprise, that's a risky venture. And it speaks to a part of human nature that is troublesome to me sometimes in any governmental enterprise, which is we're going to draw down reserves and let the next, we're going to kick the can down the road. We're going to let the next people deal with this problem. So, we need to take some responsibility too. Here, I like the 2-year plan. I think, there's another human nature thing, which is when you get in those double-digit % increases, it starts to rub a person the wrong way. And I see what you're trying to do here, is to meter in the increases to make the programs whole. And maybe, like Chair says, the governor and legislature see the wisdom of taxpayer money coming into and that could buffer some of these purely fee-payer-based programs. We don't know what the future holds. This gives us at least 2 years in advance, which is, I think, an innovation you've brought to us this year to try to catch up. And I can live with that compromise. I'd rather see things whole, but recognize that, the abruptness, the shock to the fee payer, is something that we're taking into account every year. And I think you've done this with this proposal, but my remarks are just meant to send that message that we need to manage expectations and we need to be fiscally responsible here and get to that path of locking in with cost of living in a better manner. And I think you've made your intent to do that clear, and stakeholders have weighed in that they're interested in that. And I like this idea of the annual February caucus to try to map out and do more planning and less just next year planning, but more multi-year planning. So I do support the package that you brought before us, as well as the commitment to work with stakeholders, particularly in the agricultural sector, to fine-tune the fee program, because the fees have a stronger economic signal in that sector than other sectors. I've learned that along the way, thanks to your work and that input from stakeholders. So it's worth the effort to fine-tune the fee structure in those areas. Okay, that's
No,
it
that's
for my
great.
comments.
Thank you. Well said. Other comments or thoughts? Do I have a motion?
Move to adopt.
I will second with the change sheet.
Oh, yeah, with the change sheet and the sentiments expressed. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
It carries. Thank you. I know we still have a lot more work to do on this to get where we need to go, but really good job. All right, moving to item number 6 has been postponed till October 16th through 17th. And now we're on to item number 7. So if staff could come up, I just want to say at the outset, I'm going to have to leave before this item is finished. My apologies. I just thought it was important to give people the time and the pacing on fees. I thought we would be further along, but I have to go. But I will hand the virtual gavel over to my esteemed vice chair. But I do want to hear the presentation. I think there'll be time for that. Hi, welcome. Morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Marcus and board members. My name is Mike Downey. I'm the senior engineer in the Water Recycling Funding Program in the Division of Financial Assistance. And the item we're bringing before you today is the funding proposal for the Kern Tulare Water District's oil field water reuse project. So this board item considers a resolution approving financing from the Water Recycling Funding Program and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund for the Kern Tulare Water District. And like I mentioned, the oil field water reuse project. So the Kern Tulare Water District is partnering with Hathaway and Jasmine Ranchos Mutual Water Company to manage 2,600 acre feet of produced water from oil fields to deliver to existing irrigated agriculture within the district's boundaries. So this is an additional 2,600 acre feet per year. They are currently delivering approximately 1,000 acre feet per year of this same water. This water has been used, this produced water has been used for the past 30 years in a similar manner. There's a 20-year agreement between the three parties, and it's currently operating under waste discharge requirements from Central Valley Regional Water Board. So the project, actually I'm just gonna skip ahead. I'm gonna read that, but you can look at this. So the project would build, or has built already, a 1.3 mile, 12-inch pipeline from Hathaway to a new reservoir. So this is to parallel an existing pipeline from Hathaway. So this is increasing the capacity to deliver water from Hathaway and the oil field to a new reservoir. The project would finance the reservoir and an additional 1.8 miles of 30-inch pipeline to an existing Big 4 reservoir, where water is blended from State Water Project water and then offsets water currently being used by agricultural irrigation users. So in our review of the project, we looked at it from a few angles. This is a standard infrastructure project for us in terms of the fact that it's a pipeline and recycled water storage. The unusual nature is that it is oil production water. But that oil production water is currently being treated and reused and permitted through the Central Valley Regional Water Board. This project will require a revision to the waste discharge requirements. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the conditions we're proposing is that the revised permit will need to be submitted to us prior to releasing any construction funds, thereby allowing an additional public review at the Central Valley Water Board, their process of updating their permit. Also, the project does offset groundwater pumping, and it reduces reliance on the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So one more piece on the oil field production water. Central Valley Water Board did convene an expert panel to look into oil field water used for irrigation of food crops. That analysis is ongoing and sampling is continuing this year, and they're going to hit one more cycle in 2019. And they're hoping to have a white paper presented to the Central Valley Board by the expert panel around this time in 2019. So timeline-wise, the paper would probably be produced after revised waste discharge requirements are developed by the regional board, but they have been getting quarterly updates from the panel, and sampling so far has been in line with their existing water quality expectations, and it does meet all drinking water standards currently in place.
Is there any, other than the permitting process, what's the interplay in terms of the testing, et cetera, feeding into this expert panel report? Is there a connection?
So maybe I should jump in here.
It's just the obvious question people would ask.
So there are two types of testing going on. There's the water quality testing that's associated with the permit, and that permit would be updated. It has been updated recently to add more constituents to it. And then there's the special studies of the fruit and products from the agricultural. And they have been in communication with that expert panel to ensure that if there was anything that was alarming that was seen before they finished their all, that they could take steps. They have not seen anything alarming that would require them to stop that irrigation, but they were actively looking for that. So I answered more than you asked.
No, that's helpful. Would you like to answer any other questions I haven't asked that are the obvious questions that people would raise? Just so that I can hear them before I run out of
well, I think that it was mentioned earlier, but I don't think that it was highlighted. This produced water is the water that comes up with the oil. It's groundwater that has oil in it, and they separate the oil out. This happens to be on the east side of the San Joaquin Valley, and it is from the recharge in the groundwater is from snowmelt off the Sierras. It's a very high quality water that has been used for 30 years for irrigation. And it's not a new practice. What's new is that we're actually rolling it into our funding like we would for a wastewater treatment plant recycling.
Yeah, that's helpful. Also, the purpose of bringing it before the board, is it related to the threshold of funding as well, or is it just the unique nature of this recycling project?
It's just the unique nature of the recycling project. It does have the support of staff at the Division of Financial Assistance, and the Regional Water Board is expecting to move forward processing their permit, but did make us aware that there are groups out there that have been and probably will continue to be interested in using oil field produced water for food crops.
Thank you.
Thanks. And one other piece I did want to add is that as part of the permitting process, this project does not produce a Title 22 engineering report. The Title 22 report process is for recycled water originating from municipal waste. And so this is an industrial source. And so the regional board does have all their practices of determining water quality and and monitoring requirements, but just want to make you aware that it does fall outside the Title 22 process.
Well, good. Yes, because that's really driven by reducing pathogens, mostly, in terms of exposure and public health protection. And yet we do look at things like constituents of emerging concern, in our recycled water, and Title 22 addresses that. And so your point is that constituents of emerging concern, or even just toxic pollutants that we keep track of in industrial wastewater, if we're not using Title 22 as our authority to protect public health, what authority?
So I didn't go into the level of detail, but a couple of years ago, the legislature passed a requirement that all chemicals found or used in oil field production need to be disclosed. The regional board is using that as the basis for what they're analyzing for. So that's when I said they increased and they updated their permits. They updated it based on the information about what's being used in the oil field. There's a lot of chemicals that are used in the oil field in small amounts, and they're using those to do testing. We have complete authority to ask for whatever we suspect is in a wastewater. We don't necessarily need Title 22 authority to ask for the information. So,
great, that definitely answers the question. Good old 13267 and other authorities we have to require technical reports for any potential constituents of concern. And as you mentioned, SB4 and other related legislation was specific to the source water of oil field production water.
And even simpler, it is a waste discharge permit, and they can require any sampling that things are suspected in that wastewater.
That's right, depending on the specific source. Good. Well, good discussion. And please continue.
Just the last couple slides. Our recommendation is to approve the estimated funding amount, $5.8 million. It would come from Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan, Proposition 1 loan, and would have $2.5 million of Clean Water SRF principal forgiveness. This is calculated as part of our regular review for water recycling projects coming through our division. Additionally, there's a few conditions which are typical conditions with our financing agreements. So the environmental conditions that have been prepared as part of the environmental review, standard credit conditions, like we kind of mentioned, coordination with Central Valley permitting process. And then the final one is that the agreement between Hathaway, Ranchos Mutual Water, and the district would need to be extended to the length of the loan, which is 20 years. They currently have a 20-year term, but it ends 3 years before the loan would be repaid. So that should be an easy agreement to amend per the district. And that's all I have, unless you have some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Very good. Any questions? I think one question I have is, with the principal forgiveness proposal, which is like a grant, it's through the loan program. Isn't that anchored to the goals of the state board in our funding programs to encourage water recycling? Generally as a kind of a green project reserve, and isn't there an environmental benefit here in terms of offsetting demand on groundwater that might be being overdrawn or other surface water sources?
Yes, that's right. So the board has approved the division's plan to distribute principal forgiveness to green project reserve projects, and one of the categories is water efficiency. So essentially all of the water recycling projects that go through our review qualify categorically as a water efficiency project. which per the guidelines has a maximum of $2.5 million. 50% of the project costs up to $2.5 million maximum.
And so there are those benefits of not having or having incremental benefit to not withdrawing groundwater in a basin where it may be overdrawn currently.
Definitely.
And also putting oil production water, which would otherwise be discharged back to the aquifer from where it came, and putting it to beneficial use.
Yes, it's not necessarily discharged back to the aquifer that it came from. Just to clarify, it's discharged under a underground injection control to an exempt aquifer, but it takes it out of the hydrologic cycle. It's essentially sequestered forever.
Right. So it puts it to beneficial use, and through the environmental documents, the potential impact of that incremental withdrawal of those lower aquifers has been taken into account and determined to not be significant impact.
Yes.
Okay. That answers my questions. So thank you for the discussion. And then at this point, we do have some speakers that we want to hear from. First, I want to invite Steve Dalkey from the Kern-Tulare Water District, and after that will be Mike Garabedian from Friends of the North Fork, and then Bob Gore from the California Independent Petroleum Association. Mr. Dalkey?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity today. We're grateful that you're considering funding our project. This project provides a reliable and affordable water supply to our water district. It's a water supply that's independent of droughts, which is significant. And one thing that wasn't mentioned was this is phase 1 of our project. There is a potential for a phase 2, which we're working on, and so we'll be able to, these facilities are sized so that there is expandability. And the district has been working with the state board staff and the regional board staff for some time now. I reviewed the reports that were prepared for you and the draft resolution that's before you today, and all the facts presented there are correct. And there are 7 different conditions put on the district prior to receiving funding, and I feel that all 7 of those are reasonable and they're acceptable from the district's perspective. It's our intention to get this project built as quickly as we can. It's something we desperately need. As soon as we get our last permit in place and we receive this funding, we will begin construction immediately. And so it's a project we're really excited about. We're proud of it, and we're hopeful that we can get it built. And so thank you very much. And I'm here if you have any further questions, and if anything comes up from any of the other speakers, I'm happy to address those as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalkey. Mr. Garabedian?
Morning. I'm Mike Garabedian with Friends of the North Fork, an American River group. We have many years of experience starting in 1982 on sewer plant water quality issues, in NIPI's permits and so forth. So we're here as an educational matter, noticing that this primarily brings up the question of source water from our point of view. That's why we're here to learn. And we've got a lot to learn, I'm sure, not having that background. We have some concern about the staff report, not going into the detail we feel is necessary. I'll talk about that. And then the question of the reserve, the grant, basically, and the questions of guidelines coming up. The Region 5, I think, is working on a oil field regulatory program and has another report, guidelines coming up, and then a regulatory program. Be good to know when that is. So on the treatment issues, the funding issues here, we're talking about it's for a green, it's for an environmental benefit. And so our questions have to do with is everything associated with this? Does it all have an environmental benefit? For instance, is the oil field not subject to enforcement actions, or what are its emission issues and things like that? Those to us come to mind as well as things that may well be outside your regulatory authority, but nonetheless, this is an environmental issue, and it has to do with the nature of oil and gas issues. And so we're talking about a basis on an environmental benefit. The policy, the key thing being about the nature of this regulation. There was a report done in 2016 by 3 different people. Let's see, there was, I think you might reasonably call it the Shonkoff, Stringfellow, Donner report. And it was a preliminary report, about 17 pages, and they found 173 chemicals that were of interest in this, related to this process. Now, 38% of them were trade secrets, so and some didn't have the chemical designations that they could know what they were, so they weren't able to look into that. They found 46 chemicals were potential constituents or chemicals of concern, and so 76 haven't been trade secrets. We really don't know what's going on with those. And they analyzed them and looked at them in those charts, and we think that information should be before you, because we know there are major issues here about what is coming out, what is being discharged into agricultural water and fields and so forth. So we really think that you need a lot more information before you approve this, and to know where we are going down this path. The fact that they're doing it now and want to keep doing it more, I think you need to have the full picture of what potential hazards there are before you act. And I'm very concerned about this being overall really a green project.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
So can I clarify that your action today is not approving the discharge of this water or use of it for agriculture? It is approving a funding stream through for them if they get the permits from the regional board for the expansion. The regional board permits do include the information Mr. Kamarian was talking about, which is on the nature of the water. I would also say that since the time of the report, though I'm not familiar with that exact, there's no trade secrets allowed in California oil fields any longer, and so that was changed a couple of years ago.
We would say this is premature without that information.
Okay, good. Well, and certainly there was a question you had about timeline, and I think, Mr. Downey, you touched on it, but what is the timeline of the proposed regional board reissuance of waste discharge requirements?
I believe they were thinking approximately 6 months from today.
So in the March timeframe. So Mr. Garabedian, we'd really encourage you to participate in that process to have those questions answered, because that's the discharge permit is when those questions will be answered.
Yeah, so I did sign up for the LIRIS today, and though the question of the regulatory field program is farther out than that by, I think, I would guess at least a couple of years. So, we're behind on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, Mr. Gore, welcome. You have a trifecta today, three different agenda items.
I can assure you, on behalf of the California Independent Petroleum Association, whose 300 members live and work where they produce oil and generate a considerable number of high-paying jobs. Thus, recycled petroleum water, produced water, right now is about 60,000 acre-feet in that area. It's highly valued, as you heard, and maybe even desperately needed. I've been, as you have, to many of them. I've been to all of the FSEP, the Food Safety Expert Panel proceedings, and at each meeting, the Assistant Executive Officer at some point in it states, we have no indication of any issues, we never have had. And there's never been an incident. We like Mr. Bishop said, there's no longer any trade secrets. And on that study, Dr. Shonkoff is a member of the FSEP, and Dr. Stringfellow is now their consultant. So they're highly plugged into this venture, which we fully support and fund, and it is completely and thoroughly independent. And we work also very closely with the Department of Conservation, which has the planet's most restrictive regulations governing water quality. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, well, that's it for speakers. And so any discussion from fellow board members? Nope. I don't have any further questions, so I would entertain a motion.
Move to adopt, and again, important to clarify, what we're voting on here, again, is the funding of this project. When it comes, it will have to meet all of its permit requirements, and the regional board is the primary permitting entity. So for those that are concerned about, what is being tested or what may be in the water and the constituents of the water, can certainly plug into the regional board's permitting process to have better clarity on that. But move to adopt.
Agree and second the motion.
Thank you. Let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you for your work to be good stewards of water resources in the Kern Tulare area. And thank you for coming. And with that, I think we'll move on in our agenda. Board member report, item number 8. We'd like to report, we've been on vacation. Oh, no.
Well-deserved vacation at that.
Very much so.
I'll just quickly run through that. Well, last week was the climate summit. A week can feel like a year sometimes. So I was fortunate to, in that sort of context, participate in the National Governors Association's Water Policy Learning Network Conference. So we had about 32 states represented throughout the U.S. It wasn't just Western states. We had folks from Alabama and Missouri and Pennsylvania and Kansas, and it was a good 2-day program of our own state board staff, Annalisa, who's the head of our storms unit, presented on stormwater as well. So it was a good opportunity to kind of cross-cut some of the policy discussions with our neighbors in other states. PFAS was definitely an issue as well that was of interest amongst the states and the response, and so it was a good opportunity. And then I was fortunate to attend the water pavilion as well, where then on more of a global sort of scale, we had discussions around water, and it was an encouraging week of sort of discussions and information sharing. So I was fortunate to do that. And then this past Monday, I was down in Fresno for the ribbon cutting for their drinking water treatment facility. So they, it was pretty exciting because for those of you that don't know the project, it actually uses state revolving funds and connects city of Fresno with the Fresno Irrigation District, so delivering surface water supplies so largely prior to that, their water was groundwater based, and so they had over 200 pumps or 200 wells rather, and just the other day, now with this new treatment plant in place, they were down to 19. So when you talk about the groundwater depletion within the area, the Kona Depression under the city of Fresno, these projects are going to be pretty significant to building that regional resilience. And that's that cooperation between agriculture and the urban sector. I mean, there are those opportunities throughout the state. And so it was great to, we play our small part insofar as, being able to have financial tools like the revolving fund to get these programs across the finish line. I think their loan rate is at like 1.6. So, I think that comes over to somewhere around $250 million in savings to that community, which, as we know, is already economically disadvantaged. So those are significant to, provide water affordability to those communities. So we're fortunate to have those tools. Less recognized, I think, sometimes, obviously. We get less sort of press hits on that sort of work and more on, say, some of the more controversial things before us, certainly. But it was a good opportunity to be out in the community.
That's great. I'm so glad you could attend that ceremony, and I think it's symbolic. Historically, our Central Valley communities have depended on groundwater as their drinking water supply, and it's been, a point of tension where there are a lot of disadvantaged communities, and then you see the fresh Sierra snow melt going by and irrigating the fields because that water development happened earlier in history. And this is a great example of taking the surface water resource in a balanced way and using it to manage groundwater and improving, the water quality for the disadvantaged communities for drinking water. And, in our efforts to manage surface water and groundwater holistically, there is a place for surface water to go to urban areas in the Central Valley. And still recover groundwater resources. It's possible, there's enough water, it just means careful management to also bring in public trust resources that we all want to see thrive in the future as well. So it's all possible, and that's great that you were able to participate on our behalf.
Yeah, and what I would also acknowledge is it takes sustained local leadership in order to get those projects across the finish line. We have financial resources for projects, but absent the actual projects coming to fruition, the technical assistance needed to actually develop the applications to get it through. And that's where the real hurdle is. The fortunate part is obviously, Fresno has the resources to be able to make this deal and this engagement, but there are so many smaller projects that struggle with even, forming. And so, but it takes a tremendous amount of leadership to do so. And so this project wouldn't have been there if not for the city council members, two mayor terms. It is not easy to ask people, as we saw today when we talk about fees, to increase rates or have to spend more. But that was part of this as well, was then convincing the community to say, yes, it's worth the rate increase you'll see here, and where we can provide sort of a cushioning of that with our loan authorities. I think is really critical, and so I was glad to be able to represent what has been a tremendous amount of great staff work as well on the project.
Yeah, it's a great story. Thank you. Those excellent remarks. As far as my report, I did participate in the Global Climate Summit with, first of all, Tuesday and Wednesday of last week with Secretary Karen Ross, and the Deputy Secretary, Jenny Lester Moffett, organized a wonderful international group to see in North Bay installations of projects related to the Healthy Soils Initiative. And it was great to connect with global initiatives in that regard, and also around the country, and interesting to learn from places like Southern Africa, Malawi, and work they're doing with farmers there that mirrors what we're doing, but also Oklahoma and efforts to do soil conservation there. And so I just want to thank Secretary Ross and Jenny Lester Moffett for inviting us along, and Scott Couch joined me for that. And we got to see the issue of dairies in the West Marin and beneficial use of manure and composting, and getting away from a wet method of washing down areas and getting into sweeping and really protecting water quality through those management practices is really interesting to see in the ground. And then the facilitation of composting and some real measurable outcomes for soil health that they're working on in the dairy context, but also in the vineyard context. And it's an emerging scientific area, where we know soil health and complexity, with the web of microbes, it does a lot for us for water retention and other benefits, for fertility, but it's hard to come up with a simple measurement system. We're using total organic carbon as a surrogate, and there's research going on in terms of how we really show a climate connection. Carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere thanks to healthy soils and agriculture. So it's a global movement to show that these working lands are a net sink of carbon, and it's exciting to see some on-the-ground examples. I also visited on Thursday with the Sonoma County Water Agency, now rebranded as Sonoma Water, and they were showcasing their climate adaptation programs and carbon reduction initiatives, as well as water quality and water and habitat restoration on the Russian River watershed. And
we're just going to add that I believe Yuba went through a similar rebranding recently. They dropped the county, their water agency. So it must be it's a trend.
There is a trend, clearly. And then finally, yesterday, I had the privilege of participating with the Pacific Institute on a panel of folks talking about water reuse on on-site systems. And you all know San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has shown leadership and has gathered together expert panels and working with Water Reuse Foundation and Water Environment and Research Foundation to really get a risk-based management framework around on-site reuse of all wastewater. So going to the San Francisco's Living Machine structure, where they use all the water in their skyscraper. And Scott Wiener, Senator Scott Wiener, at the time he was the supervisor of San Francisco, he ushered in a mandatory reuse requirement for skyscrapers or large buildings over 250,000 square feet have to have full reuse systems installed. And many lessons learned along the way, but now there is a bill on the governor's desk looking at the state board playing a role in certifying standards for this. And we were able to engage in that discussion, not being a backstop for receivership if a local entity should no longer be willing or able to keep a program going. And that was an important point, among others, to ensure public health protection. Meanwhile, the benefits are pretty significant, and there is a place for not just centralized water recycling, but actually this decentralized approach where a local community feels it makes sense, and you can pencil it out in certain areas. And a good example is San Francisco, where it's a lot more cost-effective to have these decentralized facilities than building in high land value areas in southeast San Francisco. To do centralized and then distributed non-potable systems. So it was good to talk to Pacific Institute. The board member from Santa Clara Valley Water District was there. They're interested in direct potable reuse. And Pacific Institute was interested in areas of research they could look into in terms of as conservation and efficiency get come into the being with the water efficiency standards. What do declining wastewater production rates, how does that affect water recycling and its economic viability and all those dimensions? So it was a good intellectual discussion there, and I appreciate being a part of that. And with that, that's my report. Next on our agenda would be the Executive Director's Report, item number 9. Anything to call out? I will say it's a very thorough report, but I appreciate the detail in every program area. There's a lot of there's ability when folks review that report to really see program output on a pretty granular scale. So I encourage folks to review it and refer to it.
I'm curious, do folks review it? Oh, I see. One remaining public member just nodded. Thank you, Don.
It's a wealth of information and tracking our programs. For those who are worried about the fees that we charge, for instance, just to give an example, there's a lot going on, and appreciate staff's effort to assemble all of that information for our review and the public's review.
It's always a balance between so much that nobody reads it and enough to capture programs or workload that otherwise really wouldn't come before you. And I think it is important for you to have a sense of how staff resources are being spent. So I know you guys have not been shy in the past about letting us know if there's too much or too little, or specific programs that need to be highlighted for some period of time. So please continue to not be shy to let us know if you want something highlighted or you're done enough already with a more detailed tracking.
No, I think the level of detail is excellent. And it just gives us the ability to communicate to the regional boards about things going on in programs that the regional board members, for instance, may not be fully aware of. So it's extremely informative. And just gives you an appreciation of the geography of our state and the diversity, socioeconomically, and just how the state board and working with regional boards touches every corner of this great state. Okay. That was a fine item, number 9. Thank you. And all I have left are the closed session items. So,
And
Mr.
that's
Loffer?
correct. There will be no closed session today, so the board will not be convening in closed session on either item. So, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Okay, I propose we adjourn the meeting, and we'll come back in October. Thank you for joining us.
See y'all in October.